Feeding our babies is supposed to come naturally. We see images of cooing babies and smiling moms and doting grandmas and expect that to be us. We don't see all the struggle that goes into every decision that seems so high stakes at the time. We don't expect all the leaking, the engorgement, the deciding to take a break. We don't expect all the judgment, whether we breastfeed or bottle feed or pump or don't. Or maybe we do expect all those things and it comes smooth sailing. But what I have encountered as a doula, a childbirth educator, and a lactation professional is that when I tell people what I do, the stories flow out naturally. And I love hearing them. I hope you do too. I'm your host, Lo. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I started the Milk Making Minutes because I'm passionate about supporting breastfeeding people. But more importantly, I knew that hearing real people tell real stories would benefit both the storytellers and the listeners. I had this idea for 3 years before I launched. I asked so many people how I should begin, and Anchor came up repeatedly as the easiest way to launch a podcast. And I have not been disappointed. If you are passionate about a topic and have wanted to start a podcast, you can use Anchor to record and distribute your podcast. It's easy to use. You can use the editing tools right from the platform. You can distribute your podcast episodes seamlessly to listening platforms like Spotify and Apple Podcasts right from Anchor. And the best part is, it's free. And the tech support has been great too. Go to anchor.fm or download the app right to your phone to get started on your great podcast idea. Hi, Kelly. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here. All right, so I'd love you to start out just by introducing yourself. Tell us a little bit about you and your family, however much you want to tell us.
My name is Kelly. I'm a mom of 2, Walden and Beatrix, and they are great.
Great. You want to tell us their ages?
Walden is 8 and Beatrix is 5.
Great. So it's been a little while since you were breastfeeding or body feeding or even bottle feeding babies.
Yes. It's been quite a few years since we've been breastfeeding.
Cool. Before we get into you actually feeding your babies, can you tell us what your exposure was to breastfeeding before you were pregnant and making decisions about feeding your babies?
Well, I have worked with kids and their families pretty much my entire life. As a preschool teacher, as a children's librarian, as a nanny. So I was around moms, dads, pregnant people, parents at story times. So I saw people feeding their babies in all sorts of settings with bottles and with breasts in public and in their homes and in schools pretty much all the time. Mm-hmm. I was breastfed. My siblings were breastfed. It was just a thing that happened. Granted, when I was a kid, it happened behind closed doors.
Okay. And were you able to talk to your mom about breastfeeding when you were thinking about feeding your babies?
I guess I said that I was planning to do it, and she was supportive. No, she was just very supportive of it. We talked about my grandparents, my grandmother's experiences. One of my grandmothers did breastfeed, despite kind of facing some backlash for it, and my other grandmother didn't. And yeah, my mom was all for supporting breastfeeding in theory. That being said, she didn't really have any practical advice.
Yeah. She was supportive as much as she could be.
She was supportive of it in theory. Go for it. But she didn't really have any of, buy a boppy pillow or use this cream or any of those technical details.
Yeah. Was it because she couldn't remember or?
Yeah, I think it'd been quite a
Hmm.
while. And a lot of the newer, the pumps and things now are a lot different than they were in the 80s
Yeah.
when my mom was last nursing.
Do you know how long your mom breastfed?
Mm. She breastfed all four of us. Probably an average of like 6 months each,
Okay.
give or take.
Yeah. And you mentioned one of your grandmothers breastfed despite backlash. Do you know what that backlash
Yeah,
was? That sounds
yeah.
really interesting.
It's really strange. Yeah. So my mom's mom chose to breastfeed, and I don't know all the details other than it was it was just that since there was formula, people at the time, whoever it was, I don't know who was giving her the pressure, thought it was such an odd
Mm.
decision for her to choose to
Mm-hmm.
nurse her babies
Mm-hmm.
when science was there to provide this formula, and 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 here she was breastfeeding her babies like an animal. I think was the phrase my mom used,
Wow.
that my grandmother had had said that people had pressured her. But she's a strong-willed woman, and
Mm-hmm.
I admire her in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, that's really fascinating. Lots of people were told that in certain time periods. So it's really interesting to hear
Right.
that getting passed that story getting passed down within
Yeah.
your very own family.
Yeah.
And that the story was passed down. So many times these stories around feeding our babies aren't really told. They
Right.
get lost.
I'll have to ask some more details.
Yeah, it would be really interesting to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So um, you're pregnant, and you knew that you were going to breastfeed just from the beginning, or?
That was my plan
Mm-hmm.
as long as everything went to plan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yes, that was my hope and my plan.
Yeah. And did you have any goals around amount of time you wanted to breastfeed? Did you read any books or look at any resources or go to any classes? How was it that you prepared yourself during pregnancy?
I winged
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
I did not read the books, but I was hoping to breastfeed for at least a year, um, because I had worked with and for a lot of families who had breastfed for a relatively extended amount of time by American standards.
Hmm.
And it seemed like a really beautiful thing, a wonderful thing. And so my goal was to aim for a year if I could, and if it seemed to be working, and then see where it went from there. Um, and that was it. There wasn't a great there there wasn't a great big plan beyond that.
Hmm.
No, no books.
Yeah. And was this something that you discussed with your partner? I happen to know you in person, so I know your partner was your husband.
My partner's my husband Steve. Yeah, I said I want to breastfeed, and he said, "Okay, that's fine."
Mm-hmm.
And that's it.
Choice was yours, and that
Yeah.
was made. Uh-huh.
And had I said, "Let's do formula," he would have said, "Okay, that's fine."
Yeah.
He was fine. Yeah. Either way, we did um try after a couple months with some pumping in bottles, but my babies really did prefer
Mm-hmm.
from the tap,
Mm-hmm.
anyways.
Yeah. Great. Cool. So before we get into actually what your experience was like, because I know for so many of us, we have all these dreams and hopes and goals, whether we prepare or we just wing it, we have a hope for what happens. But then the best laid plans of mice and men don't always go as we hope. So I'm interested to hear how it went because, we are in real life friends, but we haven't really talked much about your breastfeeding experience. We have some.
We didn't know each other back then.
Yeah. But I would love to hear just a brief synopsis of your birthing experiences, because we know that those experiences can impact the breastfeeding experience. So what were the births of your children like?
The births of my first one, Walden, was relatively average. A hospital birth. I intended the best laid plans for an all natural birth and ended up choosing an epidural, and it was fine, not traumatic. And he was born, and it took a couple days to get the breastfeeding figured out, but that was fine. I didn't get a whole lot of support in the hospital. The nurses were all for me breastfeeding, but nobody really showed me how.
Oh.
I think maybe they thought I'd read those books, and maybe I should have.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't.
Mm-hmm.
So it did take us a few days to get the latch going.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a few pretty painful weeks getting the latch, but all in all, it was an uneventful, healthy birth. And
were you able to do skin to skin immediately?
We did skin to skin immediately.
Mm-hmm.
And he was healthy, and I had no adverse after effects from giving birth.
Mm-hmm. And
go ahead.
Was it what size hospital was it?
Relatively small.
Okay.
I mean, by Massachusetts standards, medium. It was a medium size. I had a midwife.
Okay. Who was actually there at the delivery? Or
well, so it wasn't my midwife,
but
it was a midwife from the team of midwives.
Okay.
Wives from the birthing center. Yes. So it was a really supportive environment.
And do you know if they had lactation consultants on staff there?
Maybe.
Was it offered at all to you?
It was a blur. And I only stayed in the hospital. I went home 24 hours after he was born.
By choice?
By my choice. I just pieced out of there. I wanted to
get home.
So perhaps, I'm sure somebody would have come and given me a little more advice on angles and latch if I'd been there. But yeah, I don't know.
And
we got the hang of it.
Did you have you left 24 hours after the birth? You wanted to be home and snuggly, of course. That makes sense,
right?
Did you have anyone at home who was kind of there supporting you, or it was just you, baby, and husband?
It was just me and baby. And Steve had to go back to work.
Oh, wow. So just you and baby figuring it out.
Yep.
Just the two of you.
Yeah.
And do you remember it being
terrifying?
It was terrifying.
It was exhausting. It was isolating.
Yeah.
It was crazy. I called out sick when my contractions started, when I went into labor with Walden. So I went from working full time to calling out because I was in labor to being at home with a newborn. Alone.
Yeah.
And being thinking, like, what is this thing? How
Yeah.
do I feed it? But we're fine.
Yeah.
It's great. We're good. We
Right.
did it.
You did it.
I wouldn't
Right.
recommend maybe doing it that way.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But we did it.
And so
Yeah.
if you can think back to those early days when it was just you and itty bitty baby, how did you learning to feed? How did you know that he was getting milk? What were the signs that you relied on to know, okay, he's transferring milk or
Well,
getting colostrum?
my milk came in like 2 days after
Okay.
he, 2, maybe 3 days. It came in like a fire hose.
Mm-hmm.
There was no, there was no question, like, is milk coming there? It was there. So we could, there was no questioning it. You could tell that he was getting
Yeah, because milk was leaking out of
it
you.
was like,
And
yes, like it was,
uh-huh.
yeah, it was everywhere,
Uh-huh.
all the time.
And how did you know that not only was milk everywhere all the time, but that he was actually transferring milk into his body? Because that's something people worry about a lot. I worried about it a lot.
I didn't worry about that.
Okay.
Though. I'm sorry. I mean, I don't know. He peed, he pooped.
He peed and he pooped. Okay.
Yeah.
So you were not, you saw his pees and his poops and you just knew.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And so I breastfed on demand. And he was he was a super fussy baby. It turns out he couldn't handle dairy, so I had to give up dairy, but it took us a couple months to figure that out. And the only time he didn't cry was when he was nursing. So hindsight, he had reflux. So he just nursed 24/7. So I really just didn't worry about him not eating enough, because he was getting a slow trickle of milk 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how did you deal with that?
I was exhausted. I just had a baby attached to me 24 hours. I just figured I'll just survive this until he's bigger.
And were there things that you did to make it easier? Like, did you nurse in a carrier? Did you?
Once he was bigger, yes. Yeah. Yeah, he spent a lot of that first year in a carrier. There was a lot of instances where I would be eating and drop food on his little head. A lot of little cereal and sushi and burritos would fall on his head while I was eating and he was nursing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And did anyone tell you to look out for pee and poop, or you just kind of knew?
Yeah, I think the pediatricians were like, keep track of keep an eye on the diapers.
Yeah. Okay. And you said initially painful.
Yes, we didn't have a very good latch at first.
And then?
And, a few weeks in, we saw a lactation consultant at the pediatrician's office.
Okay.
And she helped us finally get a good showed me how to get a proper latch on.
And what did she, do you remember?
It was like with his lips wide open mouth.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and I think we hadn't had that right until then. He was maybe 2 weeks old at that point. We hadn't gone too far before then.
Okay. And so after that one visit with the IBCLC, things improved?
Somewhat. Yeah.
Yeah.
Your nipples get tougher as it's like playing guitar, your fingertips get calloused and your breasts get tougher with use.
Yeah.
Practice.
Yeah. Once the latch improves.
And
yeah. So did he ever lose weight, by the way?
He did.
Okay.
He was a little guy.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they worried about his weight for a while.
Uh-huh.
Questioned if I was feeding him often enough.
Mm-hmm.
And I pointed out that I was feeding him 24 hours a day.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
but you knew he was good. You were paying
Well,
attention to peas and poop. So.
once I adjusted my diet,
Oh, right, because
then
you had the dairy issue.
his weight
Mm-hmm.
stabilized.
Okay. And how he was 2 months old, you said? Or older?
Around, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then how long did it take before breastfeeding felt normal?
Not too long. No, we were really in a pretty regular swing of things. By the time by the time he was a month old,
Mm-hmm.
it was very easy.
Okay.
I mean, yeah. Yeah.
I mean,
Like,
besides the lack of sleep and right.
Very,
The
very
breastfeeding part.
the actual
right.
very easy, relatively speaking.
Right.
Like compared to the first, yes.
You didn't feel like you had to pay so much attention to the latch.
Right.
And did you have a variety of positions you could feed in? And did you feel like you could feed in public? And
so I would feed him laying in bed sometimes. I would feed him like sitting on the couch. We spent a lot of time sitting on the couch. I never could do that football hold. I couldn't figure that one out. I Googled it a lot. I watched some YouTube videos. I think that has more to do with my bicep strength than that one just didn't make sense to me. And I could feed him in the carrier. And and then once he was a toddler, well, I fed him till he was 22 months.
mm-hmm.
So there were a couple of weird, once he was standing and running, we ended up in some weird positions.
Right. Then you have no control over the situation. Right.
But we never did any of those super amazing yoga mom ones that they show you on Instagram.
Mm-hmm. And and I want to go back and ask how it was with B, because with every baby it's different. But I would like to know, before we do, with Walden, what were nights like?
Oh, nights. He just so. Am I allowed to say that we bed shared?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Great. He slept in bed with us.
Mm-hmm.
That was. I was never against it, but that was not our plan.
Mm-hmm.
We had a gorgeous crib.
Mm-hmm.
We never used
Beautiful little nursery, I'm sure.
It held all the stuffed animals very nicely.
Yeah. What made you change your mind about that?
He was just such a terrible sleeper. He just cried all the time. Because his tummy hurt. So nights he slept nursing. Like he would pop on, pop off, pop on, pop off. Yeah, he just slept with us. In the bed.
Yeah. And therefore you slept.
And that was the only way I could get any sleep. Yeah, that was if I couldn't get sleep otherwise. It was no use. I tried, but not for too long. Because it was a losing battle.
Right. Yeah.
So we bed shared.
Was there anything you did? Did you adjust the bed in any way, or adjust the bedding?
Yes. Yes, we did. Thank you for asking. So we put our mattress on the floor. Not immediately when he was a newborn, because he wasn't like rolling off the bed, but pretty soon. And there was a lot less like blankets and bedding and pillows, things like that.
Yeah.
Nothing that a baby could get tangled up in or under.
Yeah.
And especially once he got rolly.
Mm-hmm.
It was just like a mattress on the floor.
Mm-hmm. And were you wearing more clothes than you used to wear before that? Like, did you have to adjust what you wore to bed because you would be cold otherwise? I know I did. Or do you remember?
Well, that's a personal question.
Because I would get cold. I had to adjust my bedding, but then I would get so cold. So then I would have to layer
had
up.
to start sleeping with a nursing bra on.
When before you
Only
didn't.
because the side that he was not nursing on would get leaky. And so I'd have to have a nursing pad.
Right.
So I could not sleep topless.
Right.
Yeah, I forgot all about that.
Isn't that funny?
That was, yeah,
because
that's
then
a
you would
detail
have
that
like milky sheets.
I would, you change the bedding almost every day. The bedding gets so gross.
Yeah. Okay. So I know that you did not go back to work with Walden, or did you? Was the plan to?
I did. So that's tricky. No, I technically, or not technically, I went back to work the day Walden turned 1 month old.
Oh, wow.
But nobody thinks of it that I went back to work. I was a nanny in the evenings.
Oh.
And so 2 to 3 nights a week, Walden would be home with Steve. And I would pump and leave bottles and go to take care of some kids for a couple of hours.
Oh, wow.
The next town over.
Okay.
But Walden wouldn't drink the bottles.
Oh, no. Okay.
Yeah.
That's stressful.
It was a little tricky. And then I would get home. I would only work like a 2 or 3 hour shift. So with the commute and the shift, he was just hunger striking for about 4 hours.
Yeah. And did you pump while you were there as well? Or you?
I would pump. So I would drive to pick up the kids from their after school care. Pump in the parking lot of their school before getting them from school.
Did you have a car adapter or a battery?
And a battery, one side, switch to the other side. And then pick up the kids and then take care of them for about 3 hours. And then their parents would come. And hopefully their parents wouldn't want to chat with me. They were lovely people. But by that point, I really didn't have time to chat. And I would race in my car, and it was about a half an hour home, and usually halfway home, especially if I hit the brakes and the seatbelt tightened, my milk would let down in the car while I was driving.
Oh, no.
And then I would get home and I would feed Walden.
So could you have brought Walden, or?
I could. I didn't have a vehicle to fit 3 children.
And a baby.
And
I see.
So 2 children plus Walden.
Okay.
And I didn't have the vehicle.
Yeah.
And Steve was home.
Right.
So eventually, when Walden was 9 months old, Steve started night school. And another vehicle was procured by the family, and I started bringing Walden to work with me. Okay. And when Walden was 6 months old, I started working for another. By the time Walden was 6 months old, I was working for 3 different families.
Oh, wow.
But none of these were, it was all like part-time nannying jobs. So nobody ever counts that as.
It counts. That totally counts. You were working.
Yeah.
And you had to be separated from your baby, or you were separated from your baby.
So some of those, that was the only one that I left Walden home. All the other jobs, he came with me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of times, if you bring your baby with you to work, people don't count it as you went to work, even though, for the record, you were doing two jobs at the exact same
Exactly.
time
Right.
instead of
Right.
not working.
Yes. Anyone who listens to this podcast cannot see me shaking my head, but I am shaking my head. Yeah, it totally counts as work, and you're right. You're doing two jobs simultaneously.
Or no, by the time Walden was 9 months old, I'm sorry. By the time Walden was 9 months old, I was or 6. I was working for 4 families.
Wow. You were hustling.
I was working about 30 hours a week
Mm-hmm.
as a stay-at-home mom who didn't work. That's tongue in cheek.
Right. I know.
And
yeah.
And yes. Yeah.
And did you breastfeed him with the kids around? Was
Yes.
that
Yes.
Did you ever feel any sense of um like is this okay? Did you have to ask the families, or you just knew that it was fine culturally?
I knew the families.
Okay.
No, I
Okay.
knew these families while I was pregnant. I knew some of these families before I was pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no.
Okay.
No.
And did the kids ever have any questions about breastfeeding?
So the family that I went back to when Walden was 1 month old, because they had me stop working a few weeks before he was born, because they were terrified I was gonna go into labor while nannying, and their 4-year-old would have to deliver the baby.
Mm-hmm.
The 4-year-old. No, I'm sorry. He was 2 at the time. He had grabbed my breasts one day while I was still pregnant, but like maybe a week or 2 before Walden was born. And I was like, "Oh, excuse me." And he goes, "Oh, I was just feeling your milks." And I was like, "Oh, okay, Matthew. Next time, please ask first."
Right. Yeah. Let's have a conversation about consent here.
And he was again. He was 2. But I mean, no,
it was never an issue.
It was really they were all. They knew me. I knew that we're like-minded people. Which is,
that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's really great. Okay, so let's go back then.
Let's go back.
And I want to hear how your experience differed, if at all, with B.
Oh, with Beatrix.
Yeah. So you said you breastfed Walden until he was about 22 months.
Walden,
until he was 22 months.
I breastfed 22 months. Yes.
And what's the age difference?
2 years, 9 months.
Okay, so were you pregnant?
No, there was a 2-month window.
Okay.
Of
sorry, I wasn't doing good
that's
math
okay.
there.
No, there was like a 2.5 month window of not breastfeeding, not pregnant before. Well, when Beatrix was born.
Oh wait, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I want to ask a question first. What was weaning like with Walden?
Yeah, I had tapered him down. We had night weaned slowly, but no, had we? Now I'm trying to remember. Not really. We had like slowly tapered down maybe during the day.
Intentionally?
Intentionally.
You were kind of ready to be done.
We had, and he, he was eating steak and potatoes at this point. He didn't need it for all his calories for the day. And and I was getting a little touched out. I'm an introvert. I have sensory. My neurology. I have sensory issues. And there was one morning, 4 a.m. ish, around when he was 22 months old, and he was nursing, and I just sat up and I was like, "That's it!
Oh man,
I can't do it anymore." And we'd really had been like weaning down, and unfortunately we didn't make anything special about it. And that was it. I
Wow.
didn't do it anymore. And had he made a big stink about it, or like had a, I don't know, some sort of, had it traumatized him, I would have carried on. But
Reevaluated.
he
Yeah.
seemed okay.
Yeah.
So I,
This is such a Kelly story.
right?
That's it.
I winged it.
Uh-huh.
I hit a wall.
Uh-huh.
I yelled, "That's it!" You know what we did? We had, those little thermoses with straws.
Mm-hmm.
He had a little Paw Patrol one, and they're a little insulated. We started putting milk in it. Like he drinks cow milk now,
Mm-hmm.
and so we would put cow milk in it
Mm-hmm.
and keep it in the fridge. And so when he would wake up wanting to nurse,
Mm-hmm.
um, I would tell Steve, like, elbow him, like, "Hey, Walden wants to nurse. I did it for 22 months." And Steve would run to the fridge, get the Paw Patrol milk, and come back and give Walden a hug and a cuddle because we were still bed sharing, and
Uh-huh.
say, "No, you can't nurse. Here you go, buddy. Here, you can
Yeah.
have this milk."
Uh-huh.
And he would hug Walden, and if Walden was actually thirsty or hungry, and I think we had those little like pouches of applesauce or whatever. So if he was legit hungry, he could still have a snack in the middle of the night,
Yeah.
and he could still have a cuddle. It just wasn't coming out of my breasts.
Right.
Um, and it was really only a couple weeks of that, and then he just didn't ask for, and then it was fine. It was
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
But nothing special happened. We didn't make a pretty necklace out of my breast milk
Mm-hmm.
or have a tea party. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
Nothing happened on Instagram.
Yeah.
I threw a fit and it was over.
Yeah. 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 That's great.
But
But
there's no guilt. He's okay.
no, yeah, and it's interesting that you remember the last moment because I talk to so
Yeah.
many people that
Yeah.
actually don't. They
Oh,
remember
okay.
around the last time.
Yeah.
So it's actually kind of special
Oh,
that you
good.
remember,
Okay, thanks for
that you
turning it
remember the
around.
last moment.
Thanks for putting a positive
No,
spin
yeah,
on
I
it.
think that's great. I think that's great. Um,
I think I yelled, "Stop touching me!"
that's really funny and sweet and cute, and that it was at 4 a.m. in the morning. Okay, great. So I just wanted to wrap that up, put a little pretty bow on it, and then now, Beatrix.
Beatrix.
So you'd already had a breastfeeding experience. You had breastfed a child until he was 22 months old? Did you think, okay, I'll do that again this time around?
Beatrix, I was like, yeah, let's, you know, try again and see where it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Again, like, aim for a year, go farther if we want to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I ended up, spoiler alert, breastfeeding her for almost exactly 22 months, not
Mm-hmm.
intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, at least that's one thing they can't bicker about,
Mm-hmm.
right? That was fair.
Mm-hmm.
Even if
Right. I breastfed you for 22 months and you for 22 months.
I made them smoothies with
Right.
dinner tonight,
Uh-huh.
and they put their glasses side by side before sipping them to make sure they
Right.
lined up exactly
Right.
even.
You should have made them get their rulers out just to measure to the
Oh
millimeter.
my goodness. I did not plan that breastfeeding, to be fair, but I'm really glad that it worked
Right.
out because probably
Right.
they'd file a complaint.
Exactly.
So yeah, when she was born, I mean, at least I knew how to
Mm-hmm.
make a baby latch.
Mm-hmm. And was the birth experience pretty similar?
With Beatrix, I decided that I was just going to pretend it was a spa day and get the epidural
Mm-hmm.
and whatever they wanted to offer me because I got the epidural with Walden and he turned out fine. So it's cool. And so with Beatrix, I got to the hospital and was like, my name is Kelly and I'm in labor and I would like the epidural. And they were like, you seem pretty calm. We're not convinced you're in labor. Come to triage. And then I got on the table and they looked and they said I couldn't have the epidural
Because you were too far along.
because the baby was already coming out. And so Beatrix was born all natural.
Oh, wow.
Steve didn't even have a chance to park the car. It was in the fire lane in like front of the hospital.
Oh my gosh. I feel like I've heard this story, but I've forgotten. It's amazing every time.
Yeah. So she was born 18 minutes after I was like admitted, which is fine.
Yeah.
They were both the opposite. No big deal.
Mm-hmm.
I was just telling her birth story today.
Mm-hmm.
To calm her down from a temper tantrum earlier.
Mm-hmm. Is it something she asks to hear, or?
No, no. It was just like where the conversation went. It was a good distraction.
Yeah.
And with her breastfeeding was a lot easier. She didn't have the tummy aches or like the reflux. I have my theories about that. They might not be based in science, so I don't know if you want to hear them.
Sure, let's hear it.
You want to hear it?
Yeah.
Okay. With Walden, so with both my kids, I was strep B positive. With Walden, I was in labor for 32 hours. So they pumped me full of the penicillin for that whole 32 hours, which I think it's very important for babies not to go blind or die or something from preventable diseases. I think it knocked out all of the microflora in my vaginal canal, and maybe his digestive system didn't get any good stuff, and that's why he puked up a lot. Beatrix, I was still strep B positive, but I got to the hospital so late that she was born like 3 minutes after they put the penicillin IV in me, and my water didn't break till the second to last push. So she was almost born NCOL.
Oh, wow.
Right? The nurses and midwife were so excited. And then my water broke and they all went like, oh. And I was like, would you focus?
Yeah.
I'm still gonna
know.
Then she's gonna be in and then the water broke and they're like, oh no. And I was like, still
it's still my baby.
Still giving birth over here.
I'm still being born.
Focus, people. So my theory, whether is maybe that Beatrix got a lot more hopeful,
good bacteria in her gut.
Because she didn't have any digestive problems that Walden did.
I bet there are studies out there to support that.
There might be, or there will be. So
look
that
it
was
up,
easy.
people.
We bed shared when Beatrix was a baby, so she and I had the bed to ourselves because Steve slept with Walden.
Okay.
In Walden's room, in Walden's bed, because it would have been a real shock.
Yeah.
To like,
you're out of here, kid.
Yeah. Go sleep in that other room, and our bed wasn't quite big enough for 4 people.
Yeah.
So that was roomy, just us 2 girls in a queen size bed. Let's see. Oh, so breast pumps. I never really could pump with Beatrix because I had the toddler Walden. I could not sit down. So I never had. Beatrix really never got a bottle because I never had a stash of milk in the fridge because I couldn't pump because I didn't sit down. But that's fine.
Yeah. Yeah. So what was latching easier? Were you ever in pain with
There was a lot
Beatrix?
less pain with Beatrix because I got the latch right a lot faster. Because even though she didn't come out knowing what she was doing, I had the right idea from the get-go. There was a little pain at the beginning, you know. It had been a while.
And were you offered any support with her? Did you need it? Did you feel?
I didn't need it. That's funny because with B, I got a pump through my health insurance. And with Walden, I didn't. With Walden, eventually, we had WIC. With Walden and with Beatrix, actually. And Wick let me borrow a pump, like
Mm-hmm.
indefinitely. I had
Yes.
that thing forever.
Mm-hmm.
I think I gave it back when he was 22 months old or
Mm-hmm.
something. No, I must have given it back before then. I wasn't pumping that long.
Was it the Amida or the Hygia? Do you remember?
Amidas, maybe. I
Uh-huh.
don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Cool.
But yeah, yeah. That was
Great.
one thing about. There was one difference between the two of them, though.
Mm-hmm.
Like I couldn't pump with B. I
Yeah.
just couldn't
Not a
couldn't
chance to
find the
sit
time.
down. Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I know. It's.
And then I wasn't producing the extra milk because I there was
Did you
there
feel like
wasn't
you
the time.
needed extra milk? Were
Not
you okay?
necessarily. I wasn't working as much once there was Beatrix
Uh-huh.
too. I think.
Were you still nannying
N-
some with Beatrix or with once you had her?
yes,
Okay.
but not quite as much.
Uh-huh.
Not as many families.
Uh-huh. And you were able to take both
And I would bring both
kids.
kids
Mm-hmm.
because at that point I was only doing jobs where I didn't have to transport other people's children.
Right. Right. Yeah. You mentioned with Walden that you went back to nannying at 1 month postpartum when your vagina has not, and nor your womb, neither part of your body has really fully recovered. I mean,
Yes,
it takes really a year.
it
I mean,
was
most
either
people say,
that
but
or lose my job.
right. Yeah.
It was either that or don't have food on the
Right.
table.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I was lifting a 40-pound toddler
Mm-hmm.
in and out of the car seat.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was hard time.
Mm-hmm.
It was crazy times.
Yeah.
But the family, it's just America.
Mm-hmm.
It's the United States. The family I was nannying for, those children started daycare when they were 6 or 8 weeks old.
Mm-hmm. Right. So it was just normal. Right.
It's just what it is.
Now, this is a really personal question, so maybe you don't want to answer, but do you remember if you were even still bleeding?
I was
Postpartum
definitely
bleeding?
still bleeding,
Mm-hmm.
and I was definitely bleeding more on days that I worked.
Yes.
It was awful.
Mm-hmm.
But we paid the rent.
Right. Right. You were doing what you had to
Yeah.
do. Yeah. To take care of your family. Yeah.
No, it was crazy.
Mm-hmm. And then to imagine that you still have to carry that story that you weren't working or whatever BS story that is, Yeah. Yeah. So with Beatrix, you said it was you and Beatrix in the bed and Steve and Walden in a separate bed. What were nights like for her? Was she a similar sleeper? Did she nurse all night? Do you remember?
Yeah. She was on and off all night.
Mm-hmm. For how long? Do you remember? Like how many months, years?
I night weaned her. Correction, Steve night weaned her at 1.5 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And we did it on Thanksgiving weekend because he had 4 days off from work: Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So we swapped, and I slept in Walden's room, and he slept. I mean, by 1.5 years old, we hadn't been sleeping in separate beds that long. We love each other,
right? Yeah.
But I think we did the same thing with like the little applesauce pouches and the thermos with the milk and stuff.
So providing lots of little comforts and
like
snuggles.
Oh, you're thirsty, here's a hug and this milk. But she wasn't nursing nonstop at night until 1.5 years old. But Lo, I really can't answer your question because there were plenty of nights when my kids would nurse and I wouldn't even wake up and know.
Yeah. Right.
So I can't tell you
Right.
how many times a night they nurse.
Right. Which is the difference between safely bed sharing and waking up, picking up the baby, attaching the baby, changing the diaper, putting the baby down, going back to bed, trying to fall asleep, waking up, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Could I do it again now? I don't think so. I think I'm too old.
Yeah.
I could. If I absolutely had to, I could.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd sign up for it.
Yeah.
But yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't but she was 1.5 years old when we weaned her at night. And then she could still nurse as she wanted during the day
Mm-hmm.
for a few more months.
Mm-hmm.
And at 22 months. I did not mean to wean her at 22 months, but I got very sick and I had to take a lot of medicine and I was not able to nurse her for about 3 days because of all the medicine that I was on. And then she seemed pretty cool with it. So it was over.
Yeah. Did she ever ask again after that? Or it was just, we're done? You would just answer her, we're done.
I mean, she had only been nursing once or twice a day by that point anyways. And it's a chronic illness. So the likelihood that within the next couple of weeks and within the next couple of months, I was going to have another 3 or 4 days where I was going to be on so much medication that I couldn't safely let her drink breast milk. It was highly likely, so it just seemed like we needed to call it. So we did.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. So 2 children all the way to 22 months, and now they're 8 and 5. Yeah, that's amazing. And they can't fight over who was nursed longer.
They can't. So. But the smoothies, I bet if you weighed them out on an atomic scale, I bet you one of them tonight was a little bit
heavier. Yeah, and that's the one you love more, I'm sure. Well, this has been so awesome. I don't know if you like talking about breastfeeding as much as I do, or if it has brought back any
I
fond
like talking
memories
about breastfeeding. I don't know anybody who likes talking about it.
Children were babies. But I would love to know if you can think about it as we wrap up. 2 more questions, and maybe a third one if you can think of it. Some people haven't been able to, but one is, what was the worst advice you were given when it came to breastfeeding? Or you could give me a worst experience. Somebody has given me that too, if that comes more quickly.
Okay. Oh man. Oh wait, you asked me if I breastfed in public and I never answered.
Oh yeah.
So Walden, not so much. Because my milk would let down so powerfully that he would whip his head away because he was choking, and my milk would shoot across the room.
Right.
And I thought it'd be rude to put cream in somebody else's coffee who hadn't asked for it at the restaurant.
Right.
Beatrix, I breastfed in public all the time because for some reason, by the time she came around, my milk let down in a normal person way. I thought I should tell you that.
Yeah, that's so fascinating.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I really couldn't breastfeed Walden in public because I would have gotten arrested for assault with.
Well, you were pumping with him, right?
I was, and I just had so much extra. The worst I found personally, those disposable nursing pads were the worst. Now, my sister uses them all the time. And for me, it felt like putting sandpaper in my brow. And I really liked the bamboo nursing pads. But they're not as absorbent and they'll leak and they'll make your shirt. You got to change them like 10 times more often as
Yeah.
the disposable ones.
Wow.
That doesn't really answer your question.
No, yeah. It's the
but
worst product.
I don't know. I was given a lot of those disposable nursing pads,
And they did not work for you.
I don't know.
Yeah.
They were so uncomfortable.
Hmm.
I can't think of any
That works.
bad advice.
So you hated the disposable nursing pads?
I hated the disposable nursing pads.
Yeah, that's interesting. We often, it's funny because in the lactation field, we often will steer people away from the reusable ones, not because we're against reusable things which are better for the environment, but because people often will use them too much without washing them and then end up with like bacterial infections.
They get gross if you don't wash them.
Exactly.
And they get
right.
stinky and they will like leak through.
Right. Yeah.
But they're not scratchy.
Yeah.
But
well,
like
you're
I
very
said,
sensitive, right?
I have sensory issues.
Mm-hmm.
So it is just me. Because every time my sister's a breastfeeding person right now, and every time she changes her nursing pads when we're hanging out and she uses this disposable one, and I look at her and it's like, even seeing her, I'm like, how can you use those? Like,
well, that's so good for you to say that, though, because you're not the only person with sensory issues breastfeeding a child or body feeding a child, right? So if somebody has tried those and they're like, oh my gosh, I just have to let milk flow from my body and all over my shirts.
Feels like sandpaper in your bra.
Right.
The bamboo ones don't hurt, but they're not as absorbent.
Yeah. Would you wear multiple? Would that help?
I would wear the overnight ones, which don't look pretty under your shirt because they're bulky. And you just got to switch them out like 10 times more often.
Yeah.
I just have a whole bag full in my purse.
How long did you have to wear nursing pads? Do you remember?
With Walden, a lot more. Again, like I was pumping. And, with Beatrix, I really don't remember.
Yeah. For most people, it's usually like the first few months.
A few months.
And then you're able to kind of, your body kind of down regulates.
Yeah. Yeah. It may have been at least 6 months with Walden. With Beezy, again, that was all at that point, it was all a big blur.
Yeah, I know. You were chasing a toddler and never sitting.
I was just running in circles, feeding people and changing their diapers.
Right.
I don't know why.
Right. All right, and now the best advice you were given. Or best experience, if that comes more readily.
The best advice or experience. Oh man, you should have let me have some time to think about this.
Yeah, maybe next time for the next person, I'll let them know that I'm asking.
So I have a friend, Kelly. And a friend, Matt. And when Steve and I were traveling, and we didn't have kids yet, and we stopped and visited them, and their son was just about 1, we stayed with them, and she was still breastfeeding their son, and we were just passing through and crashing and doing, dumb people in their late. Steve and I, not them. They were doing responsible parent things. And Steve and I were just doing the traveling, drinking beer type things. And they were letting us crash, and she was still breastfeeding, and none of my friends had kids yet. Well, most of them. And we were just hanging out, and she was just, you know, letting her son breastfeed as he wanted. Um, and my friend Matt, who's her husband, um, her son's dad, we're just playing video games and watching TV, and he's just hanging out and just nursing and then crawling off. He learned to walk like a month later, and then coming back, and it was nothing. It was no big deal. It was Nobody paid it any attention. It Nobody commented. It was I didn't have any friends who had kids yet, and it was just such a natural thing to see. I don't know. It was really beautiful.
Yeah.
And Steve and I weren't even really like talking or thinking about having kids yet, but seeing that with them, like I remember thinking that night, like, if Steve and I have kids, like when Steve and I have kids, like, I want it to be like that.
Oh.
They're really good parents. And it was just a really just beautiful, just like natural, easy, instinctive like love for that baby, for that toddler.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what breastfeeding, that's why I love it so much, is it allows us to start out our relationship with our children in that way. And then it grows into other things. But it allows us to establish that relationship of cuddling and providing for them. And you can do that in other ways. People who don't choose to breastfeed can do that in other ways. But it, for me, was the way that I could do that when I wouldn't have necessarily known how to do it in other ways. That's such a beautiful story.
Yeah.
And I have people like that I can bring to my mind that I had not been exposed to breastfeeding. But before I had kids, I can bring those people to my mind who made me think, oh my gosh, I want that.
Right.
And it's always mobile children that I think of, not itty bitty babies.
Exactly.
Like the mobile ones where you're like, oh, they're doing that. They're coming to their mother and asking for breast milk.
Yeah.
And then going off and then coming back and going off. That's really beautiful.
It was really beautiful.
I love that.
In a very just quiet, unobtrusive way.
Yeah. I think we'll end there. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your such personal stories with us. I'm so thankful to my friend Kelly for sharing her stories of breastfeeding her 2 children with very little support, so that anyone who can relate to those stories can hear them and feel less alone. If that was you, please take the extra few seconds or minute to rate the Milk Making Minutes in whichever podcasting app you listen to it on, and then to leave a review. It goes a long way in helping the show. One other way you can help the show is to share this episode or any other you feel would be helpful to a friend or a relative who you know could benefit from listening to an episode. Thanks so much. Thank you so much for listening to the Milk Making Minutes. I hope you found connection and feel supported wherever you are in your baby feeding journey. The views expressed in each interview are deeply personal and sacred, and I'm so grateful to each person who was generous enough to share their story. It is also true that those views are solely theirs and do not necessarily reflect my opinion or advice as a lactation supporter, and this podcast does not qualify as medical advice. If you are struggling to feed your baby, please seek out the support of a local IBCLC.